Hello, welcome to the second part of this screencast of talking about our oxygen and carbon dioxide transport. So in this one we'll be discussing primarily how carbon dioxide is transported. So in the previous one we talked about how oxygen was transported in the hemoglobin molecule and its structure. So if you haven't watched that one, you should probably watch that one first. So there are a few different ways in which carbon dioxide is transported in the blood here. So let's get started with this. So according to the coloring book page there, about 67% is transported as bicarbonate ion, about 24% is as carbaminohemoglobin, and then 9% of it of the carbon dioxide is dissolved actually in the plasma. So contrast this with the primary way in which oxygen is transported, that is just simply by hemoglobin. There are actually three different ways that the carbon dioxide is transported. So I want to call your attention to how the coloring book sort of talks about this here. So this is how it's talking about carbon dioxide here, and then yeah, so that's the symbol that they're using there for the carbon dioxide. So we'd seen this slide before. We were talking about the PO2 and the movement of oxygen, but here I want to talk about now carbon dioxide. And so let's go to the systemic capillaries here, where carbon dioxide is being picked up or loaded here into the plasma. So here's the CO2 here. So the PCO2 from previous screencasts we know is about 46 millimeters of mercury, and the PCO2 as the blood enters the systemic capillaries, the PCO2 as it enters is about 40, and as it leaves the PCO2 is 46 because it's picked up, PCO2, here it's picked up carbon dioxide. Now, the loading of carbon dioxide, the primary way, 67% of that carbon dioxide is transported thusly as this bicarbonate ion. So what happens is that carbon dioxide will combine with water, and there's an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase, and carbonic anhydrase is the enzyme which will convert carbon dioxide and water into carbonic acid, H2CO3. Now this carbonic acid is a relatively weak acid here, but it will dissociate, and this arrow here is dissociate, and as you recall from basic chemistry, this dissociation of this carbonic acid yields a hydrogen ion or a proton, and this bicarbonate ion here, HCO3. So you'll hear them read that the majority of carbon dioxide is transported in the blood as bicarbonate ion. Now, what I like to just do down here is, so like here's HCO3, this is the ion, and carbon dioxide is in here, right? So you could kind of factor this out, and if you factor out carbon dioxide out of this, you're left with then HO, right? Plus this other proton that's hanging out up here, and what are you left with? You're left with water and carbon dioxide. So the math kind of works out, the algebra kind of works out, the chemistry works out here. So you need to be able to discuss this reaction as it goes this way here at the systemic capillaries, and the role of carbonic anhydrase. And this is all happening because, again, the PCO2 is higher in the tissues than it is in the plasma as it comes into the systemic capillary. Now, at the pulmonary capillary, the reverse happens. The unloading of PCO2 actually changes the acidity here, changes the pH, and this reaction shifts back this way, where the bicarbonate ion and the proton combine to form carbonic acid, and then carbonic anhydrase will actually reverse this reaction here and produce CO2 and water. And again, since the PCO2 here is much lower, right, about 40, the PCO2 here is about 46. And so this is the impetus to sort of get rid of this carbon dioxide and to shift this reaction back this way. Right? So again, the carbon dioxide is transported as the bicarbonate ion, and again, this accounts for about 67% of the transport of carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide can also be transported on the hemoglobin molecule. So this is what we see here. So let's just orient ourselves here for a second. So here's the tissue cell. Up here, CO2 produced in this tissue cell is moving down its partial pressure gradient through the interstitial fluid into the plasma, and then will actually enter the red blood cell. So this is showing some of this carbon dioxide being bound to hemoglobin right here, and so we see that hemoglobin picks up CO2 and a hydrogen ion here to become carbaminohemoglobin. Carbaminohemoglobin right there. Now the interesting thing is that this carbon dioxide does not get bound to the heme group. Again, this carbon dioxide does not get bound to the heme group. It actually gets bound to one of the globin side chains, and so it does not really affect very much the binding of oxygen, right, to the heme group. That's what sort of is being shown in the previous screencast there. Now at the lungs, and so if we just follow, this is going to the lungs, we follow this arrow back up here, and so now what happens is in the alveolar spacer, this pCO2 is lower, and so this carbon dioxide is going to diffuse down its partial pressure gradient, and that is the impetus then for hemoglobin to release carbon dioxide here, as well as this whole bicarbonate system here. So you see the bicarbonate system happening sort of over here, and this is what I talked about in the previous slide, but this one was just calling your attention to the fact that hemoglobin also binds carbon dioxide, just not to the heme part. And that's about, this here is about 24% of the carbon dioxide is transported thusly. So if we go back to our image here, let's go over to the right here and notice that carbon dioxide here is being produced in the cells. That has nothing to do with the mitochondria. So this is again just being produced by the Krebs cycle. And that carbon dioxide diffusing down its partial pressure gradient is binding here in the plasma with water and forming, this is the carbonic anhydrase reaction here, and so you form this bicarbonate ion. So this is how the coloring book authors have designated that. So this is supposed to be the bicarbonate ion plus a hydrogen ion here, or the H2CO3, right, depending on which way this is shifted. So this is the carbon dioxide being transported as bicarbonate ion. But I also want to point out the fact that right here, here's your hemoglobin molecule, and there's CO2 right there bound to the hemoglobin, but notice that it is not bound to the heme group where the oxygen would bind. And so then lastly, we have some of that carbon dioxide just dissolved in the plasma there, and that is roughly around 3% or so dissolved in the plasma. So the carbon dioxide as bicarbonate ion, number 1, as carbaminohemoglobin, number 2, and then just dissolved in the plasma is making its way to the pulmonary capillaries right here, and you see then the unloading of the carbon dioxide here from the carbaminohemoglobin, the reversal of carbonic acid forming carbon dioxide and water, and then the just this carbon dioxide that is dissolved in the plasma is being unloaded as well. And again, all of these arrows here represent a diffusion down the partial pressure gradient of CO2 from 46 to a pCO2 of around 40. And so we have this diffusion down there, and then the exhalation of that out. Right? And again, here's the big picture. Again, I would take some time and go through and color these, but let's just point out what we have here. Again, this is internal respiration up here, so this is the production of the carbon dioxide here via the Krebs cycle primarily, and then this diffusion down the partial pressure gradient. You see combining of water with that to form the H2CO3, carbonic anhydrase, doing that work right there to get the H2CO3, the carbonic acid, which then is going to dissociate into a proton, and then here is your bicarbonate ion. So these are then transported back to the lungs there. You also will see some of this. Here's this proton and some of the carbon dioxide binding ultimately to the hemoglobin molecule right here. Right? And so now we have this carbaminohemoglobin that is going to be transported again back down this way and go then for external respiration to the pulmonary capillaries, where we now see the recombining of the bicarbonate ion and the proton to form H2CO3. Carbonic anhydrase right here is then releasing the carbon dioxide and then producing water. So this is the carbonic anhydrase enzyme there. There's carbonic anhydrase up there. It's a reversible enzyme and is able to do that reaction in both directions there. And then you also will see some of the, here's the proton coming off the hemoglobin right there, right? And then that carbon dioxide is going to be diffused down its partial pressure gradient this way into the alveoli and then expired out. Okay? So, this screencast, again, summarized, you should be able to describe and explain how carbon dioxide is transported via the carbonic acid bicarbonate ion system. That's one, but also not mentioned on there is its role in hemoglobin's role in transporting that, as well as then it just being dissolved in the plasma. Okay, thanks for listening. Hope that helps. See you in class.